We are here at the Hawks practice facility in Brookhaven talking about exit interviews after the Hawks' first round playoff exit, losing to the Celtics in 6 games. But Lauren, the mood has really not been that bad, considering that a lot of people expected Atlanta to maybe get swept, and they ended up really battling. Before we talk about what players said, what coaches said, I want to ask you the biggest question on probably everybody's mind: what do the Hawks need to add or subtract from this roster to be a contender, which is what they want to be?
I think the biggest thing, and you'll probably touch on it or agree with me, is just defense. I think they do need a lot of defensive-minded players who are going to battle every single night. I think one of the things that this team struggled with was intensity consistently, and they said it themselves that they needed to come out of the gate a little bit harder, or they needed to play the full 48 minutes a little bit harder. So I think they just need some more guys on this roster who have that, as the kids like to say, that dog in them, and I think that can help you, just because a lot of the times it's mostly about effort on the defensive end, and sometimes we see this team kind of drop off on that.
Trae Young spoke about how success doesn't happen overnight. Now, on one hand, maybe that's a little frustrating for people to hear because this is Trae Young's 5th season in Atlanta. However, you do have pretty much a brand new coach in Quin Snyder, and you added Dejounte Murray. It can take time to get that chemistry right. Here's what Young said.
When you make a coaching change in the midway, it's tough and it's not easy for anybody. And so I think we handled it the right way. We still finished and made it to the playoffs, and we played a really good team, so it's tough. You want to win it all, but you got to appreciate the moments and the growth and steps it takes to get to the top. So I feel like this is part of our growth and our steps to get there.
Okay, so Lauren, give me your take on that. I understand sometimes you do have to be a little patient. Boston is maybe a decent parallel for that. It took a while for the Jays to get going, to get the right coach, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, as they say, success doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? And I think this team is finally starting to figure out what path it wants to go on. I think that it has an actual plan or timeline in place. Of course, they're not going to tell us what that timeline is, but I do think—
Map it out for us real quick.
Right. But I do think that they have a plan that they want to implement, which starts with development. And that starts from Trae Young all the way down until the 15th man, 16th man, 17th man, how many ever people are on the roster. But as you mentioned, bringing in a guy like Quin Snyder, I think, is the right move, just because he's a guy that is going to connect with Trae Young. And we heard that throughout the exit interviews, and not just Trae Young, but everybody on this team, how much he's able to connect with them. So I think, yes, we have to be a little bit more patient with how this Hawks team is building this roster out, especially because you have to look at that 2021 Eastern Conference Finals run as kind of like not a blip, that's not the right word for it, but a good dot in the journey.
Even great teams don't make the Eastern Conference Finals every year.
Exactly.
It's hard to do. It's hard to sustain.
It is hard to sustain that, but I think the fact that they're trying to develop these guys internally is going to be a huge part in, one, the money aspect of developing a roster, but also it creates just a lot of more trade value, players who will help them longer term. They can get better return for them. So I just think that in slowing things down a little bit, it's kind of the best option for them.
I mean, we constantly are talking, and he's very cerebral. He's very smart. Like, when it comes to, as a point guard, you want to get everybody involved. You want to get everybody touches, and sometimes it's tough when everybody doesn't know where to go, or you know where everybody's at, and he does a great job of making sure I know where everybody needs to be at, and making sure everybody else knows where they need to be at. Like, it goes both ways. Like, you need to have somebody that leads you on the court, and then a coach that can lead the team and lead everybody else too. And
time has been invaluable in that respect, not just in the present, but as you begin to see ways that I think for the players and for myself and for Landry and all the different ways that, we can begin to grow and get better. And to feel that and to see it, in a tangible way is really beneficial for all of us as we kind of embark on, this next phase.
Trae Young has been singing Quin Snyder's praises. You can tell he loves this guy. He loves playing for this guy. He spoke about how smart Quin is and how much he learns from him. And honestly, that was echoed. A lot of guys have echoed that. Now, of course, I mean, they're not going to say anything on the record of he's not my favorite, but it really does seem like he has. Even you see him in this facility working with guys one-on-one, really paying them a lot of attention. And I do think you could see that translate in some ways. Yeah. I know you're writing about this right now as we speak. Check AJC.com for this story. What have you seen just as far as how the guys have bought into Quin Snyder and what that means for this team moving forward, especially when you consider some of the drama the Hawks endured this season with, losing Nate McMillan and maybe the relationship between Trae and Nate, whatever there was to that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just how he's been able to connect with everybody on an individual level. And he said it best in his exit interview with the media that everybody is different. Everybody learns differently. Everybody reacts to things differently. And so the fact that he's concentrating on the person as opposed to the player is a huge thing. And that's not to say that, previous coaches never did that, but it just seems the way that he's able to reach these guys, talk to these guys, help them see the game in a way that it turns on a light bulb. I think that's the biggest thing. It's what shifted this culture. And I know Quin Snyder hates that word culture. Not in a bad
it's maybe way. But it's people say it a lot and It can mean a lot of things.
Exactly. And so I think he is understanding that everything is going to happen on an individual basis, and that's how you're able to grow the team, is that you're focusing on each person's strengths, each person's individual contributions to the whole, and that's how you create a successful roster.
I mean, it was great. You take the good, the bad, and just the journey, and you enjoy it. Great stories doesn't happen overnight. Success doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of downs and a lot of days you got to grind it out. You got to figure it out. It takes getting to know each other, off the floor to having a bunch of practice time together. It's just not, you don't just go out and play in the games and, have chemistry. Like I said, it starts with off the floor to practices, and then it translates to the game. And, we had a lot of great moments. There's always room to improve. And, I think just we had a bunch of games where we showed that, it could work. And obviously a bunch of games the other way, You want to be a consistent team, you want to be consistent as players. And, I think just the way we both love the game, study the game, we showed, times where, okay, it's worth it, or they could really do it. And like I said, it comes down to us as individuals wanting to continue to learn each other, get to know each other, and just wanting the best for each other, because it only helps the team. And at the end of the day, it's a team sport, and you need a team, but you got to start somewhere. So I feel like that's where we can start at.
And at first, it's to be expected that it might look a little clunky. You're asking two primary ball handlers to now share a backcourt with each other, but two very talented playmaking ball handlers. And it's had its ups, it's had its downs, to be honest. I think that we've all seen that, where it looks a little clunky, but there's also times where it's been beautiful to watch. They play for each other, they play within the game flow, and you just see how talented they are as a group, where it's like, well, if that guy's not doing it tonight, that other guy sure is, and it becomes a nightmare for the defense. And so it's still working in a complementary sense, but I think we got a great taste of it in the last month here. I think Quin has been able to figure out a great way for those two to coexist in a way that is going to enhance our group. But like Trae Young and Dejounte Murray as your backcourt, that's a fun backcourt.
Okay, so Lauren, I mean, there's examples where those two guys paired together brilliantly. The fourth quarter of Game 3 is a huge example of that. But then, in those guys' own words, there's some games when it wasn't working. And this team being at 500 for most of the season is an example of that. Landry Fields, GM, spoke about how he was expecting a little bit of clunkiness because both of those guys are used to having the ball in their hands. Only one guy can really do it at a time. Exactly. What did you see as far as how those guys, how their relationship and dynamic developed over this season?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of questions. There's always questions about how players play with Trae Young, right? But I think that this season, we actually really started to see a sense of maturity with Trae and how he's connecting with his teammates, because that's always kind of been the question of, do people like to play with Trae Young? And I think particularly in this playoff run, we started to see this team chemistry that had been questioned at the beginning of the year, and we started to see everything click, and we started to see all of these guys buy in. And I think because of the team bringing in Quin Snyder, he's helped them to tap into the connectedness that he's wanting to see. Of course, the big thing is to see that consistently, but he said relationships take time with anything. It doesn't matter whether it's a coworker, your best friend, your partner, whoever it is. Everything is going to take time, and I think that's what it ultimately goes back to, is that there needs to be a sense of patience with what this team is trying to build, especially since you added in so many factors like Dejounte Murray. And you can't expect success overnight, especially because they're two similar players but also very different players. And so you do have to take time to figure out each other's nuances, each other's styles, and how it can be that pick your poison offense that they wanted it to be.
John Collins did not speak to media today. He did speak for a few minutes after the Game 6 loss, had some good things to say. He was another guy who sort of talked about it doesn't happen overnight. He talked about how being at 500, being in the middle is sometimes the most difficult place to be. It's not okay, you're rebuilding, you're down here. It's not okay, you're a contender, there's all this pressure. Being 500, I don't think was mentally easy on John this season. He's a guy his name is always, in trade rumors. That can't be mentally easy either. I don't want to read too much into him not talking, because sometimes guys just logistically, they want to go. It's been a long season. It's been a long season for Lauren. It's been a long season for these guys playing. I don't want to read too much into it, but it is unique, though. John is a guy who's extremely media friendly, which we appreciate. He is wonderful to talk with media and always so candid. What did you make of him not talking? And honestly, bigger picture, just what do you make of where the Hawks and John Collins, how things will shake out for them this offseason?
I have to say, it was very odd. Like you said it yourself, John Collins is a very media friendly player. You request him for an interview.
Very bubbly.
Very bubbly, very transparent. And, he is one of those guys that you typically always get a yes from when you request him to speak. And so I did find it a bit odd that he deferred to his post-game interview yesterday and declined to speak with us today. But I don't want to read like you said, I don't want to read. You don't want to read too much into it. But I did ask Landry Fields this afternoon about where they are with, evaluating where John Collins fits on this roster, and he was a little cagey with the answer. He says he's an important guy to us, and he can be an important guy to a lot of people. And so it just seems that this team is going to continue to just keep looking at the options that come their way when it comes to John.
Okay. One last big picture question. You touched on this a little at the beginning as far as what the Hawks need, but where is your head at just what the Hawks can be next season? I think after let's take it all the way back to when I was on the beat, the Eastern Conference Finals run, that set the bar so high for this group. And again, you're not going to go to the Eastern Conference Finals every year. Even great teams don't do that. But it does seem like this franchise has taken a couple steps back from that the past couple years. But there's also a little bit of encouragement. I think this series, you don't want to have a moral victory, but this series, the Hawks competed in a way I think a lot of people didn't think they would. Where is your head at with just what's achievable? There might be some roster shakeups, we'll see, but what the Hawks can get done next season.
Yeah, I think that we can see a team that doesn't underperform and is, hopefully a winning record team.
You don't want the 500 thing to become your identity. That's you don't want that. You don't want that.
Yeah, I definitely think it's achievable for this team to, be in the playoffs. I'm not saying I can see them necessarily being a 1 seed or a 2 seed, but you can see them maybe taking the path of the Brooklyn Nets, going into the playoffs as a 6 seed, hopefully not getting swept in the first round, but, kind of repeating what they did this season again, maybe pushing it to a 7-game series as opposed to just 6. Maybe we can see them getting at least to the Eastern Conference semifinals. I mean, I do think that with this team, the bar is always going to be high just because you have a player like Trae Young, you have a player like Dejounte Murray, who are 2 All-Stars. So I think the bar is always going to be high with this team, especially when you bring in a coach like Quin Snyder. The expectations kind of skyrocket a little bit more.
It's got to be not making the play-in tournament, right? Like avoiding the play-in tournament has got to be a goal.
Absolutely. And I think, the fact that this team has just gone to the play-in for 2 straight years, the first time they were, the 10th seed or the 9th seed?
I think it was 9.
Yeah. And they had to go through 2 games, having to go through just 1 this time. I do think that is a positive step forward for them. And so next year, it's about being the 6th seed or higher.
Lauren, thank you so much for joining me. You have been doing an awesome job covering the Hawks this season. You were a trooper. You did so great.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for watching. Make sure you go to ajc.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel to find more videos just like this one.